Hello, welcome to another video on our channel. Here, we translate testimonies of people who have had near-death experiences and other spiritual experiences. Today, we will learn about the story of Friedrich Arndt. He tells died and predicted global conflicts in August after near-death experience. Let's pray for Europe. If you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now. Leave a comment with your name and your city. Let's now listen to Friedrich's testimony. Hey guys, my name is Friedrich Arndt, and today I'm here to tell you a story that changed my life in a way I never imagined. Do you know when we think we have everything under control, that life is moving along its normal path? Well, that's how I felt at the beginning of 2016. I'm a university professor in Leipzig, Germany. I have a very ordinary life, you know? I teach, I do research, I go home to my family. But then, out of nowhere, everything turned upside down. So, let's go. It all started with a surgery that seemed very simple. You know those things we do thinking it's going to be peaceful and it ends up becoming a mess. That was exactly it. But look, never in my wildest dreams could I have imagined where this would lead me. Get ready, because the trip I'm going to tell you about is breathtaking, literally. Well, as I was saying, it all started with a seemingly simple surgery. It was January 2016, and I had gone to Pittsburgh in the United States to have neck surgery. Nothing major, just to remove some bone spurs. You know those little things that grow where they shouldn't? So it is. The doctor was a highly recommended Korean. Everyone spoke well of him, so I was calm. The surgery went well. Everything went well. At least that's what I thought at the time. I returned home to Leipzig thinking everything was resolved. But then, my friend, things started to get strange. 3 days after returning home, in the middle of the night, I felt a pain in my chest. But it wasn't just any pain. It was an absurd pain, the kind that makes you scream. And I'm not one to make a fuss over every little thing. My wife, Helga, woke up scared by my screams. At first, she even thought it was our daughter Greta who has Rett syndrome. But then she realized that the problem was with me. It was a rush. Helga rushed me to the hospital. I was bad, really bad. When we got there, what no one expects to happen happened. My heart stopped. That's right, it stopped beating. There, at that moment, my first near-death experience began. Look, I know this might sound crazy. Believe me, I would too if someone told me this beforehand. But what happened next? Man, I can't explain it. It's something that goes beyond what we know, you know? It was then that I realized that life is much more than we imagine. Much more indeed. So there I was, lying on a hospital gurney. My heart stopped. The doctors were doing everything they could to bring me back, and I was somewhere else. It's hard to explain, but I'll try. Suddenly, I found myself surrounded by light. But it wasn't just any light, you know? It was a warm, welcoming light. I felt at peace like I had never felt before. It was as if the entire weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders. And then, in the middle of all this light, I heard a voice. It wasn't just any voice. It was the voice of my brother-in-law, Hans. Yeah, Hans. He had killed himself 7 weeks earlier. It was a blow for the whole family. And there he was, telling me that I was in a good place. He asked for my help to resolve some things he had left pending on Earth. Man, that left me completely confused. Like this? Was Hans okay? But hadn't he killed himself? Look, I've always been Catholic, you know? And we learn that suicide is a mortal sin, without forgiveness. But there, at that moment, all my beliefs went down the drain. How could Hans be in a good place if he had taken his own life? This experience affected me in ways you can't even imagine. It was like everything I thought I knew about life and death had been thrown out the window. And the crazy thing is that I wasn't afraid. On the contrary, I felt at home, you know? As if that was where I was supposed to be. But then, out of nowhere, I felt a pull. It was like something was pulling me back. And in the blink of an eye, I was back in my body, With the doctors around, everyone was relieved because they had managed to bring me back. After that first experience, I went through a very difficult recovery period. I was weak, confused, trying to understand what had happened. The medical team was monitoring me the entire time, afraid that my heart would stop again. But you know how it is? We think that the worst is over, and that everything will be fine now. I'm mistaken. A few months later, one spring morning, I had another heart attack. It was out of nowhere. I was at home, feeling good, and suddenly, bam! The chest pain came back with a vengeance. This time we already knew what to do. Helga took me to the hospital at lightning speed. Arriving there, I was seen by Dr. Carl Müller, an incredible cardiologist. This woman, I'll tell you, she didn't give up on me for a second. Business was bad. My heart was working again, and Dr. Müller was doing everything to keep me alive. She told me later that, during the procedure, she heard a voice. Not just any voice, but the voice of her father, who had already passed away. He was encouraging her not to give up on me, even when it seemed like there was no other way. And that's when it happened. I had my second near-death experience. But this time, my friend, it was even more intense. What I saw and felt, man, I can't describe it in words. It was something that moved me in a way I never imagined possible. You know when they say that life plays like a movie in our heads? Well, it was more or less that, only 1,000 times more intense. And what I saw, well, that deserves a chapter of its own. In this second experience, things got even crazier. Just imagine. I was there, technically dead again, and suddenly I found myself in the middle of something I can only describe as a web of light. It was like I could see all the connections in the universe, you know? Every person, every living being, every particle, everything connected by this incredible light. And then, in the middle of all this madness, a figure appeared. He wasn't an ordinary person. It was a being of light, an angel, I don't know. This being started talking to me about a lot of things. He spoke of tensions and conflicts that were going to happen. He said that he needed prayer chains, especially in Europe. Until date he gave me. August 15th. Look, I know this sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, but I promise you it was real. I felt, I saw, I heard. And the crazy thing is that I understood everything. It was as if I suddenly had access to all the knowledge in the universe. At that moment, I understood that everything, absolutely everything, is connected. Every choice we make, every word we say, everything has an impact on the whole. And love, my friend, love is the force that holds it all together. You know what's craziest? I didn't want to go back. There, in that place, I felt complete, at peace. It was like I had found my true home. But then, just like the first time, I felt that pull. It was time to go back. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the hospital, with Dr. Müller and the entire team around me. They looked exhausted but relieved. I had come back, but this time, I knew nothing would be like before. After this second experience, things became even more complicated. My body was at its limit, you know? The doctors decided to put me in a medically induced coma for 4 days. They thought this would give me a chance to recover. But let me tell you, these 4 days were quite a trip. I was in a coma, but my conscience, man, she was more active than ever. It was as if my mind had expanded beyond the limits of my body. And that's when something happened that touched me deeply. In the midst of all this expansion, I found, well, I don't know how to explain it, but it was like the spiritual essence of my daughter, Greta. You remember I said that Greta has Rett syndrome, right? It is a condition that affects her development and makes communication difficult. But there, at that moment, there were no barriers. It was as if we could communicate from soul to soul. And do you know what she told me? 2 simple words, but they carried all the meaning in the universe. Love me. Just that. Love me. It seems simple, right? But in that moment I understood the true meaning of unconditional love. This experience with Greta reinforced everything I had learned from my near-death experiences. Love is the most powerful force there is. It's what connects us, what gives meaning to everything. When I finally came out of the coma, I was a different person. Not just because my body had been through a lot, but because my soul had been transformed. I saw the world with different eyes now. Every person, every living being, everything seemed precious and connected to me. But the journey was not over yet. My heart was still working, and the doctors had bad news to give me. When I came out of the coma, the doctors came to talk to Helga and me. The news was not good. My heart was very damaged. All those heart attacks had left him too weak. Dr. Muller was direct. I needed a heart transplant. Man, that was a blow. I mean, I had just been through incredible experiences. I had seen the other side, and now I was being told that I needed a new heart to continue living. It was a lot to process. A new phase of my journey then began, waiting for a donor. And let me tell you, this waiting is one of the hardest things I've ever experienced in my life. Every day was a struggle. My heart could fail at any moment, and we never knew if a compatible donor would appear in time. During this period, I had a lot of time to think. Thinking about life, about death, about everything I had experienced. I started to see the world in a different way. Every moment was precious. Every breath was a gift. And you know what's craziest? Even with all the fear and uncertainty, I felt at peace. Those near-death experiences had shown me that death is not the end. It gave me a comfort I had never felt before. But I'm not going to lie, the wait was agonizing. Every time the phone rang, we thought it might be the hospital saying they had found a donor. And every time it wasn't, it was as if our hopes were a little dashed. Months passed. I had complications, hospitalizations, moments when I thought I wouldn't make it. But whenever I was about to give up, I remembered that network of light, that connection with everything, and that gave me strength to continue. Finally, on June 6, 2016, the phone rang. It was the hospital. They had found a compatible donor. Man, it was a mix of emotions that I can't even describe. Relief, fear, gratitude, all together. The surgery was scheduled for that same night. As I prepared, I couldn't stop thinking about the person who had donated their heart. Someone had died so that I could live. It's a heavy business, you know? Before entering the operating room, I gave Helga and Greta a hug. I didn't know if I would see them again. But strangely, I wasn't scared. After everything I had seen and felt, I knew that whatever happened, everything would be okay. The surgery lasted hours. When I woke up, I was full of tubes and machines, but there was something different. A new heart beating in my chest. It was a strange feeling. Good, but strange. The first few days after the transplant were a roller coaster. My body was trying to get used to the new heart, and the doctors were keeping an eye out for any signs of rejection. But little by little, I recovered. And then something really crazy started to happen. I started to notice changes in myself that went beyond the physical. Suddenly, I had tastes and preferences I never had before. I started to like foods that I didn't even come close to before. Songs that never interested me began to move me. At first, I thought it was all in my head. But the more I researched, the more I discovered that this was common in people who had transplants. It was as if a part of the donor's identity had come with the heart. This made me think a lot. Is the heart more than just an organ? Does it carry memories, emotions, part of our essence? I don't know the answer, but after everything I've been through, I'm open to believing in things that I would previously have found impossible. After the transplant and this whole crazy journey, my life completely changed. Not just because I had a new heart beating in my chest, but because my view of the world, life and death, was totally different. Before, I was a skeptical, down-to-earth guy. He only believed in what he could see and touch. Now I know that there is much more between heaven and earth than we imagine. That experience of the network of light, that feeling of connection with everything, it changed everything for me. I began to see each person, each living being as part of this great web. You know when they say we are all one? Well, I really felt that. And this changed the way I relate to people. to nature, to everything. My relationship with Greta, my daughter, became even stronger. That moment I had with her during her coma made me understand love in a way I had never understood before. I started to value every moment with her, every smile, every look. At work, as a teacher, I began to see my students in a different way. There weren't just people there to learn what I had to teach. They were souls on unique journeys, each with their own purpose. It made me a better, more compassionate teacher. And you know what's craziest? That fear of death that most people have? It disappeared. Not that I want to die, far from it. But now I know that death is not the end. It's just a transition to something that we don't quite understand yet. Of course, not everything is rosy. There are days when it's still difficult. I take a lot of medication. I have to have constant checkups. But even on bad days, I remember that light, that connection, and it gives me strength to move forward. Well, folks, that's my story. I know it sounds crazy, and it's okay if you don't believe everything. I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't been through it. But I want to leave you a message based on everything I experienced and learned. We are here in this life to learn to love. It's that simple and that complicated at the same time. That light I saw, that connection I felt, deep down it's all about love. Love for family, friends, strangers, nature, everything. We spend so much time worrying about small things, about silly fights, about who is right or wrong. But in the end, none of that matters. What matters is how we treat others, how we take care of this big world we live in. Another thing I learned is that we are much more than this body. Our consciousness, our soul, or whatever you want to call it, goes far beyond what we imagine. Death is not the end. It's just a change of state. I realized that we don't need to almost die to understand all this. It's all there, at our fingertips. We just need to stop for a moment, take a deep breath, and pay attention. In nature, in the people around us, in ourselves. So, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this whole story, it's love it. Love me very much. Love your parents, your children, your friends. Love the strangers on the street. Love nature, love life. Because in the end, that's what matters. And remember, we are all connected. Our every action, no matter how small, affects the whole. So let's do our part to make this world a better place. A smile, a kind word, a gesture of compassion. It can change someone's day, which can change someone else's day, and so on. Well, that's it. This is my story, my journey. I hope that in some way it touched you, and if one day you find yourself doubting whether there is something beyond this life that we know, remember me. From the guy who died twice and came back to tell the story. Thank you for listening to me.